Alright everybody, in this video we're going to have a talk about how to come up with research questions, and this is a really important part of any kind of research project that you might be engaged in. And one of the things that we might be thinking about, and I often get asked this, is what actually is a research question? It seems like a really basic and obvious question, right? But actually it's a little bit more complex than we give it credit. And basically a research question is the thing that's going to drive your whole research project. It gives you a sense of direction, a topic to inquire into, a problem to solve, and it will help you to design your research project and come up with methodologies and other parts of the research project. One way to think about that research question is as being part of a hierarchy of other research concepts. Now, at the top of this hierarchy is a statement of your research area. So what is the actual thing in general that you're interested in investigating? The second is a definition of the research topic. So while you've got a general research area, a large overview of a field that you might be interested in, a research topic is narrowing that down to a very specific part of that broad research area. Then we start to develop your research question. Maybe it might be a couple of questions, or it might be a very specific research question. Then underneath that research question sit these things called inquiry questions, which actually help us to investigate the specific research questions. Think of the inquiry questions as helping you to answer the research question. And the last thing, it might be questions like survey questions or interview questions that are part of your data collection process. So when you're trying to come up with a research question, I think it's really important that you're curious about the topic, hopefully something that you're interested in, and maybe something that you're passionate about. Research projects can be very small. They can be anything from a couple of weeks to a couple of months if you're doing something in your workplace, to potentially a number of years if you're engaging in postgraduate research. So I mentioned the workplace because one way of thinking about research problems is to come up with a problem of practice. And this doesn't mean that you're having a problem in your classroom or whatever work environment you're in, but it means that you're taking something that goes on in your workplace and thinking about it as a problematic, like thinking about it in a way that makes it worth investigating. Now, one really convenient scaffold for understanding problems of practice and making them something worth investigating is a thing called Tripp's scaffold from 1993. And there's a link to the document that came from in the description of this video. But basically, Tripp said it's worth observing what's happening in your work environment, in a classroom, for example, and then creating critical incidents out of your observations. So when you look at something, ask yourself, why is that thing happening? And do I want to know more about it? So you might have a student behaving in a particular way in a classroom that piques your interest, and you're thinking, well, why is that going on there, and what can I find out? Or maybe you're interested in why students are consistently making a particular mistake, and you can investigate what's going on there. And then Tripp suggests planning a response, and this might be a research project, or if we are engaging in action research, you might start thinking about cycles of reflection and changing what you do in the classroom. Then implementing the response or running the research project and determining, gathering data and seeing how effective your intervention in that classroom is. And then another cycle of observation and creating critical incidents and so on. The key thing here is that there are three questions that I think help to create a problem of practice, so something worthy of investigation, and forming that into a research question. So the first question you might ask is, why did that thing happen? Like, what's going on here, and I want to know more about it. Secondly, you should ask why it's interesting to you. What is it about this particular instance or occurrence that you're interested in? And then why might it be interesting to somebody else? So research can be something that we do just for ourselves, but ideally research should be shared with other people so that they can learn from it too. So a good research question is interesting not just to you, but also to an audience. Basically, good research is visible, so it can be accessed by anybody in a similar workplace to your own. Good research is also usable, so it can be read really easily. You might make it in the form of a kit or a workshop or even a report, but you're making it usable by other people, particularly when we're talking about practitioner research in particular workplaces like classrooms. And it should also be significant, which means that good research is meaningful. It addresses something that people care about. So let's try an example here. I might take as a research area YouTube and learning. And then I'm going to narrow that down to a specific research topic, which is the effectiveness of YouTube videos for learning about research methods, kind of like what you're watching right now. So a general research question that I might ask, given that research area and that specific research topic, is do YouTube videos make it easier for students to learn? And then underneath that research question, sit a series of inquiry questions that are going to help me answer my research question. For example, how does retention change when comparing YouTube to other media? And what impact does the use of YouTube have on conversations in a classroom? They're just a couple of examples of inquiry questions that might help me answer my general research question. It's really important when you're coming up with research questions, especially if you're talking about a small research project. Don't make your questions too big. Big questions, really giant questions, the kind of questions that we're really interested in when we buy like a popular psychology book from a bookstore, those sorts of questions usually have massive teams of people working on them. They have scholars and academics who have been working on these problems for their whole careers. When you're coming up with a research question to think about in your own practice, in your own workplace, or maybe a small community-based research project that you're interested in, it's really crucial that you put some boundaries around that question and make it smaller and more accessible and easy. So be realistic when you're forming a research question. Be bounded, so actually set some context and some boundaries around the size of your research project, and be really clear about what those contexts are and the particular groups that you're addressing. So let's take that research question that I provided before. Do YouTube videos make it easier for students to learn? So it's actually a really broad general question. A company like Google and YouTube with tons and tons of money might sink heaps of resources into answering this question over a long period of time. But if I wanted to do this project in, say, 6 months, I might need to put some boundaries around it. So I'd need to define this word easier here. What do I mean by making something easier? What does that look like? How can I measure it? The word students is also important as well. Which students am I talking about? Creating a context here might matter. Do I mean university students, high school students, primary school students? Is there a particular classroom that I'm interested in? Where are these people from? So these are really important questions. And the other thing here is the idea of learning. What kind of learning are we talking about? What kind of content are we talking about? And how am I going to measure learning? There are also 3 different formats that research questions generally take. The first might be exploratory. So that question might be, what are students' attitudes toward learning videos on YouTube? And what that's going to do is enable me to explore different statements and ideas and feelings that are coming from students. And that'll actually shape the kind of research project that I create. The second are descriptive pieces of research. So they can have a bit more of a definite, precise answer. So I might ask a question like, how long can YouTube videos maintain student attention? And there's going to be particular methods and metrics and measures and possibly quantitative measures that are going to enable me to answer this research question. And the last set are relational, which tend to talk about statistical correlation, but they can also use qualitative research data to establish relationships between different things. So the question here might be, what is the relationship between YouTube videos and learner engagement? So you can see here that whether I'm dealing with an exploratory question, a descriptive question, or a relational question, the actual question itself is going to shape the kind of research that I'm going to do afterwards. The other thing to keep in mind is that your research question is allowed to evolve, and it probably will as you go through different stages of your research project. The most obvious is that you'll be doing a literature review, hopefully, at some point, to see whether or not, 1, there's space for your research question, so see whether or not other people have done similar research and you might find a gap that your research fills, or 2, to see what other research people have done that is very similar or has addressed a similar question, maybe to save yourself the time doing that research in the first place, but also to get ideas from that other research about how you might conduct your own research. If someone's done a very similar research project to yours, maybe you're going to use their methods and apply it to a different context. Secondly, as you're going through the research design process, you'll probably find you need to change your research question a little bit as well. As I mentioned a moment ago, if you're looking at those 3 different research designs, exploratory, descriptive, and relational, they're going to imply particular different methods. Some of them will be suited to statistical methods, controlled experiments, for example, or single case research design. Sometimes they'll lend themselves more to qualitative research approaches like ethnography, case studies, or maybe action research. And the last thing is when you actually get to the data collection stage, you may have to evolve your research question a little bit more. Or if you want to stick to your research question, your data collection is going to have to change. So 3 key things to take away from this. Keep the context realistic. Small-scale projects are easier to put together. Focus on something that's interesting to you and hopefully that you're passionate about so that you're able to sustain interest. And make it meaningful as well, so it's meaningful to somebody else and it's meaningful to you. And that's it. If you need more advice on research design or research paradigms, check out some of the other YouTube videos on this channel.